And finally, our persons of the week. We've all imagined traveling in time. What if the people you loved years ago could sit in your backyard once again?
We treat time like a prison sentence, always moving forward, locked into a straight line. But what if that line is an illusion? What if the past, present, and future coexist, separated only by a paper-thin fabric that occasionally rips? The 10 cases we are diving into today aren't campfire stories. They are raw, physical anomalies left behind in the gears of history, people, objects, and anomalies that stepped across a threshold and stumbled into the wrong century. Let's begin. The Moberly-Jourdain incident. The air in the gardens of Versailles usually carries the scent of blooming roses and the faint hum of distant tourists. But on August 10, 1901, for two highly respected British academics, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, the atmosphere did something impossible. It curdled. As they strolled past the Grand Trianon looking for Marie Antoinette's private retreat, the Petit Trianon, a sudden, heavy stillness slammed down on the landscape. They later described it not just as a quietness, but as an oppressive weight, a physical pressure that drained the color from the trees and left the world looking flat, lifeless, and intensely dreamlike. The vibrant afternoon sun seemed to vanish, replaced by an eerie, shadowless glare. They had no idea they had just walked through a tear in the fabric of the present. As they continued down a fading path that shouldn't have been there, the modern world completely evaporated. The casual visitors in Edwardian dress were gone. Instead, they encountered men dressed in long, wheel-shaped green coats and three-cornered hats who spoke in an archaic dialect of French, urgently directing the women down a different route. The landscape itself had shifted. Buildings and kiosks that were long demolished in 1901 were suddenly standing intact, crisp and solid against the strange sky. Then came the focal point of their journey, a woman sitting on the grass outside the Petit Trianon, sketching. She wore a pale summer dress, her hair swept up in a fashion that had died out over a century prior. When the two women finally crossed a small bridge and joined a normal party of modern tourists, the heavy atmospheric pressure vanished instantly like a popped bubble. The sounds of 1901 rushed back. Terrified and deeply confused, they began digging into the historical archives of Versailles. What they found altered their lives forever. The blueprints of the gardens from 1789 perfectly matched the impossible kiosks and paths they had just walked through, structures that had been completely leveled during the French Revolution. Even more chilling, the sketching woman's attire and distinct features perfectly mirrored contemporary descriptions of Marie Antoinette herself during her final days at the estate. Moberly and Jourdain didn't just glimpse the past, they physically occupied a space where 1789 and 1901 had briefly, violently folded into one another. But what happens when the anomaly doesn't just leave a memory, but a physical artifact cast in solid metal? The Coso artifact. In the freezing winter of 1961, three passionate rockhounds were scouring the rugged, windswept mountains near Olancha, California, searching for unique stones to cut and polish for their local gem shop. Among the debris, they picked up what appeared to be a completely typical, mud-crusted geode, a hollow, spherical rock usually lined with mineral crystals. But when they brought this specimen back to their workshop and attempted to slice it directly down the middle with a heavy-duty, diamond-edged saw, the industrial blade suddenly groaned, choked, and completely ruined its teeth on something impossibly hard, embedded deep within the stone. Encased inside the ancient solid rock layer was not a pocket of sparkling quartz, but a highly sophisticated piece of modern electronic technology. The core of the mysterious object was a porcelain cylinder, perfectly smooth and bright white, meticulously wrapped in a core of magnetic copper wire. At its exact center sat a 2-millimeter shaft of bright, entirely uncorroded metal. Surrounding this incredibly delicate internal assembly was a hexagonal sleeve made of copper and unknown organic materials, all of it perfectly sealed within a hard, fossilized matrix of prehistoric shells, ancient clay, and pebbles. When professional geologists later examined the outer sedimentary casing of the stone, They estimated the natural formation of the geode to be at least 500,000 years old. Think about that mind-bending timeline. 500,000 years ago, the dominant hominid species on Earth hadn't even mastered the basic bow and arrow, let alone precision metallurgy or electrical engineering. Yet, here was an object that perfectly mirrored the structural architecture of a mid-20th century mechanical spark plug, trapped inside a geological capsule from the deep past. Later radiographs of the artifact revealed an internal spring and a tiny precision washer, confirming it was part of a complex, energy-conducting ignition system designed for mechanical combustion. How does a piece of modern manufacturing find its way inside a rock that took eons to solidify? Traditional archaeology demands that human history is a slow upward climb from crude stone tools to silicon chips. But the Kozo artifact completely shatters that neat, comfortable line. It strongly suggests that our current technological era is either a repeat of a forgotten cycle or that someone from our modern world left a heavy mechanical footprint in the prehistoric mud, millions of days before their own birth. It remains a physical anomaly locked inside a prehistoric tomb. But what happens when the anomaly doesn't just leave a silent object behind, but instead pulls a living witness straight out of the modern sky, the flight of Sir Victor Goddard? The open sky can be an incredibly lonely and unpredictable place, but for British Wing Commander Sir Victor Goddard, it became an active corridor through time itself. In the autumn of 1935, Goddard climbed into the cockpit of his open-cockpit Hawker Hart biplane to fly from Edinburgh back to his home military base in Andover, England. The weather started as standard British grey, but as he approached Drem Airfield near Edinburgh, a site he knew intimately as an abandoned, completely overgrown and decaying relic from the First World War, the atmosphere suddenly turned violently hostile. A bizarre, hyper-localized storm system rolled in out of nowhere, spinning with uncanny yellow and blue clouds that instantly rattled his mechanical instruments and forced his plane into a terrifying, uncommanded descent toward the Earth. Goddard fought the stiff controls, completely blinded by a strange glowing vapor, fully expecting to smash violently into the ground below. But as his biplane broke through the bottom of the thick cloud deck, the violent wind ceased instantly. The blinding rain vanished, replaced by a sudden blast of brilliant, hot summer sunshine. Goddard looked down at the familiar layout of Drem Airfield, and his breath caught in his throat. The derelict ghost town runway with cracked concrete and wild weeds was gone. Instead, the airfield below him was completely pristine, bustling with intense, highly organized military activity. The tarmac was freshly laid, and the previously dilapidated hangars looked brand new. Even more jarring were the specific visual details. Mechanics walked the grounds wearing bright blue overalls, a color completely alien to the Royal Air Force in 1935, who exclusively wore brown outfits. Parked on the pristine runway were 4 airplanes. 3 were familiar biplanes, but painted a startling, brilliant yellow. The 4th was a sleek monoplane that Goddard had never seen before in his life, the Miles Magister. Deeply shaken by the impossible sight, Goddard flew onward through the sunshine, eventually landing safely at his actual destination. He tried telling his military colleagues what he saw, but they laughed it off as a vivid hallucination brought on by low oxygen. Goddard kept quiet, but he never forgot the vivid details of that summer day. He didn't have to wait long for real answers. In 1939, as World War II loomed, the RAF officially reopened Drem Airfield. They painted their training planes bright yellow. They changed their mechanics' uniforms to blue, and they rolled out a brand new aircraft model to train their pilots, the Miles Magister. Goddard hadn't looked at a mirage. His biplane had flown straight through a meteorological rift and coasted through the actual skies of his own near future. The time-traveling hipster. Sometimes, the fabric of time doesn't warp in the remote wilderness or high up in the sky, but right in the middle of a crowded public event, captured forever by the unblinking lens of a camera. In 1941, a crowd gathered in British Columbia, Canada, for the official reopening of the South Fork Bridge after a devastating flood. Decades later, the virtual archives of the Braylorn Pioneer Museum made a routine photograph from that day public. At first glance, it looks like a typical, beautiful mid-century snapshot filled with men in sharp fedoras, tailored suits, and women in structured winter coats. But if you look closely at the right side of the frame, the entire historical reality of the image violently fractures. Standing half a head taller than the crowd is a young man who looks like he walked straight off a modern city street. Every single detail of his appearance screams the 21st century. While every other man in the frame wears formal, period-accurate hats and heavy wool overcoats, this individual is dressed in a casual, loose-fitting printed t-shirt under an open, modern-cut cardigan sweater. Even more jarring are his accessories. He is wearing thick, dark-rimmed designer sunglasses that feature side shields, a style completely unheard of in the wartime era of 1941. To top it off, his hands are clamped tightly around a compact portable camera featuring an advanced cylindrical lens attachment that drastically differs from the bulky, folding box cameras used by the professional press photographers standing right next to him. The physical expression of the man is equally fascinating. He has the relaxed, detached posture of a modern tourist observing a historical reenactment, completely contrasting with the stiff, formal posture of the local citizens around him. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is that the photograph is entirely authentic. It wasn't altered, edited, or manipulated in any way. The physical negative exists in the museum's permanent collection, untouched since the day it was developed during World War II. No one has ever been able to identify this man, nor did any local resident recall a bizarrely dressed stranger standing among them at the bridge. He simply appeared in the frame, cast a shadow in the 1941 sunlight, and vanished back into the ether. He remains a silent, visual paradox, trapped in silver halide. A traveler who forgot to blend in, leaving behind an undeniable piece of photographic evidence that the arrow of time might occasionally skip a beat. Sometimes, the disruption isn't a person passing through a crowd, but a total stranger appearing out of thin air in the heart of a bustling metropolis. The Man from Taured. The bustling checkpoints of an international airport are designed to filter out anomalies, but in the sweltering July heat of 1954, Tokyo's Haneda Airport encountered a regular passenger who managed to completely break reality. A well-dressed, middle-aged businessman stepped up to the customs counter after a routine flight from Europe. He spoke fluent French, excellent Japanese, and behaved with the calm, casual demeanor of a seasoned corporate traveler. But when he handed over his passport to the officer on duty, the entire room descended into a state of sheer bureaucratic panic. The passport was entirely authentic, featuring pristine official stamps and high-quality security watermarks, but it was issued by a country that simply does not exist on our globe: Taured. The customs officials, assuming this was an incredibly elaborate practical joke, escorted the gentleman into a private interrogation room. They pulled out a large world map and asked the traveler to point to his homeland. Without a single moment of hesitation, the man pointed his finger directly at the European continent, landing squarely on the small, real-world principality of Andorra, nestled snugly between France and Spain. But when he looked at the map, his face went deathly pale. He became visibly distressed and angry, declaring that Andorra was a fake name. He insisted that Taured had existed in that exact location for over 1,000 years, and he had never heard of Andorra in his entire life. To make things even more baffling, his personal belongings backed up his impossible story. His wallet was packed with diverse European currencies, and his checkbook contained routing numbers for a major bank that didn't exist in our timeline. He possessed a valid driver's license issued by the government of Taured and international business documents intended for a meeting with a major Japanese corporation. The officials called the Tokyo company listed on his itinerary. The company reps responded that they had never heard of this man or his manufacturing firm. Confused and deeply suspicious, the Japanese police detained the mysterious traveler overnight in an upper floor of a nearby luxury hotel. 2 armed guards stood watch directly outside his single door. and his room had no balcony, with windows locked tight from the outside. Yet, when the sun rose the next morning, the man had completely vanished into thin air. His luggage, his mysterious passport, and his official documents had evaporated along with him, leaving behind an empty room and a terrifying question. Did a traveler from a parallel timeline accidentally slip through a cosmic doorway, only for the universe to violently correct its mistake? The Liverpool Bold Street slips. Time usually feels solid, anchored heavily by the heavy brick and mortar of our urban environments. But on Bold Street in Liverpool, England, the concrete has a terrifying habit of liquefying, dropping unsuspecting pedestrians directly into the past. Over the last several decades, dozens of entirely independent witnesses have reported walking down this busy commercial shopping avenue only to experience an identical, deeply unsettling sensory shift. It always begins with a sudden, deadening silence. The ambient noise of modern city life, the rumbling of public buses, the chatter of shoppers, and the distant hum of traffic is instantly sucked out of the air, replaced by an eerie, vacuum-like stillness that feels almost physical. One of the most intensely documented encounters involved a man named Frank, who was walking down Bold Street in the mid-90s looking for a local bookshop. As he crossed the intersection, the modern asphalt beneath his feet abruptly gave way to rugged, hand-laid cobblestones. Startled, he looked up and realized the entire layout of the street had transformed. The sleek, modern storefronts filled with digital electronics and contemporary fashion had completely evaporated. In their place stood vintage shops with heavy wooden window frames, gas lanterns, and painted signs displaying names of long-dead businesses. Frank watched in absolute astonishment as people dressed in 40s wartime attire walked past him, completely oblivious to his modern clothes. The distinct smell of thick coal smoke and horse manure filled his lungs, replacing the familiar scent of automobile exhaust. He walked toward a storefront that used to be a modern clothing boutique, only to find a sign for Cripps, a high-end 20th-century furrier. When he looked down at a delivery truck rattling past, he noticed it bore the logo of a historical Liverpool dairy company that had gone completely out of business decades before he was even born. Terrified that he was suffering a profound neurological breakdown, Frank panicked and stepped back toward the main intersection. In an instant, the heavy silence popped like a bubble. The roar of modern engines rushed back into his ears, and the cobblestones vanished beneath a fresh layer of gray asphalt. When historians later reviewed his detailed account, they confirmed that every single shop name, vintage vehicle logo, and architectural detail Frank described perfectly matched the exact layout of Bold Street in 1947. He hadn't suffered a hallucination. He had briefly stepped into a localized pocket where the past refused to stay buried. If a person can stumble across the centuries by accident, is it possible for a machine to do it by design? The bizarre case of Rudolph Fentz. In the middle of a warm June evening in 1950, the bright, neon-drenched chaos of New York City's Times Square became the backdrop for a tragedy that defied the basic laws of physics. At approximately 11:15 p.m., a man suddenly materialized in the center of a busy intersection, standing completely frozen in absolute terror amidst the flowing traffic. Onlookers noted that he looked completely out of place, dressed in pristine, immaculate 19th-century fashion. He wore a high silk top hat, a dark, tightly tailored frock coat, and trousers with a distinctive checkered pattern. His shoes were polished leather with heavy metal buckles, and a thick, well-groomed handlebar mustache dominated his pale, panicked face. Before anyone could approach him or guide him to safety, the man panicked at the sight of the roaring, motorized yellow cabs bolted toward the sidewalk and was instantly struck by a passing vehicle. He died on the asphalt within minutes. When the New York Police Department arrived to process the scene, they searched his pockets to identify the body, assuming they were dealing with a theatrical actor or an eccentric historical reenactor. Instead, the items they pulled from his clothing turned the routine accident investigation into a profound, chilling historical mystery. Inside his pockets was a collection of completely uncirculated, crisp 19th-century paper currency, alongside a handful of old copper coins that had been out of circulation for decades. They found a metal token for a long-forgotten saloon on Fifth Avenue, a copper beer token, and a formal business card bearing the name Rudolph Fentz with an address located in Upper Manhattan. The final piece of evidence was a yellowed letter addressed to Fentz, bearing a crisp postmark dated June 1876. Despite the age of the paper, the ink was fresh, entirely unsmudged, and the items showed absolutely no signs of natural aging or decay. A missing persons detective named Hubert Rien took over the baffling case, tracking down the address listed on the business card. He discovered that a Rudolph Fentz had indeed lived at that exact location, but the records showed he had mysteriously vanished without a trace in the summer of 1876, at the age of 29, never to be seen again. Fentz hadn't aged a single day. He had walked out of his front door in 1876, stepped directly through a transparent 74-year gap in time, and arrived instantly in the middle of a terrifying future, paying for the temporal jump with his life. The Philadelphia experiments, ghost sailors. While most temporal anomalies happen to solitary individuals by pure, chaotic accident, the event known as the Philadelphia experiment suggests that an organized military operation managed to accidentally weaponize the fabric of time itself. In October of 1943, the United States Navy was conducting highly classified electromagnetic warfare experiments aboard the USS Eldridge, an advanced destroyer escort docked in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The objective was to utilize massive high-powered generators to warp electromagnetic fields, effectively rendering the massive warship completely invisible to enemy radar systems. But when the switches were thrown and the generators hummed to life, the experiment achieved a terrifying form of visibility. A thick, glowing greenish-blue fog enveloped the hull of the massive ship, accompanied by a sharp, nauseating ozone smell that filled the shipyard. Within seconds, the physical structure of the USS Eldridge began to fade from view, completely vanishing from its berth in a blinding flash of light. For several agonizing minutes, the ship didn't just disappear from radar, it completely vanished from our physical reality. Eyewitnesses reported seeing the warship briefly manifest miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, before it snapped back to its original location in Philadelphia, like a rubber band releasing its tension. But it was the human cost, the terrifying physical state of the crew members who returned with the vessel, that revealed the true nature of what had occurred. The men hadn't just moved through space. Their internal biological clocks had been violently ripped out of alignment with our universe. Several sailors materialized with their bodies literally fused into the steel bulkheads of the ship, their molecules permanently bonded with the metal. Those who survived were left in a state of profound psychological and temporal displacement. Witnesses recorded that some of the surviving sailors would spontaneously fade from view in public settings, a phenomenon they called freezing, where a man would become completely intangible and invisible unless physically touched by his comrades. Their biological processes were completely out of sync, trapped in a continuous, terrifying loop between 1943 and an unknown chaotic void. The experiment didn't just bend light. It tore open a massive temporal rift that left its victims stranded outside the steady, normal flow of human history. The Swiss ring watch in the Ming Dynasty tomb, the heavy stone doors of ancient tombs, are designed to seal the past away from the present, keeping human history neatly categorized and untouched. But in December of 2008, a team of seasoned Chinese archaeologists and journalists working in Shaanxi County completely upended our understanding of linear time. They were filming a documentary while carefully excavating a massive, completely undisturbed tomb belonging to a high-ranking official from the Ming Dynasty, a powerful imperial era that ruled China from 1368 to 1644. As they cleared away the centuries of heavy, impacted soil from the exterior of the ancient stone coffin, a small, metallic object detached from the clay and clattered onto the rock floor. Initially, the researchers assumed it was a loose piece of traditional burial jewelry or a scrap of bronze filigree from the imperial coffin. But when they washed away the thick layer of fossilized mud and examined the object under a magnifying glass, the entire room descended into an absolute stunned silence. The object was a tiny, precision-engineered golden ring featuring a functioning watch face on its exterior. The miniature hands of the timepiece were frozen precisely at 10:06. The real shock came when they flipped the micro-artifact over and cleaned the reverse side. Engraved in crisp, modern Latin script was a single word: Swiss. Think about the sheer impossibility of that physical discovery. The tomb had been completely entombed, sealed, and undisturbed for over 4 centuries, protected by multiple layers of heavy stone and concrete that showed absolutely no signs of entry or tampering. Yet, modern Swiss horology, a highly specialized trade that did not exist in its miniature ring watch form until the late 19th century, was sitting buried beneath earth that had been undisturbed since the late 1600s. How does a modern European luxury accessory find its way into a sealed ancient Chinese tomb? Traditional history offers no answers for how an object can predate its own creation by hundreds of years. The ring watch remains a solid metallic paradox, suggesting that a traveler from our modern era somehow dropped a piece of 21st century manufacturing into the open tomb during the Ming Dynasty, leaving a tiny golden mechanical fingerprint to be dug up centuries later. Our final anomaly suggests that the future doesn't just look back at us. Sometimes, it accidentally leaves its journal behind. The chronovisor chronology. Our final anomaly suggests that the future doesn't just look back at us. Sometimes, it invents a machine to broadcast our past in real time. In the early 70s, a brilliant Italian physicist and Benedictine monk named Father Pellegrino Ernetti sent shockwaves through the academic world by claiming that a secret team of 12 world-class scientists, including the legendary Enrico Fermi and Wernher von Braun, had successfully constructed a functional time-viewing device inside a prestigious university laboratory. They called this highly controversial machine the chronovisor. It didn't physically transport human flesh and bone through the centuries. Instead, it operated like an advanced, multidimensional television set that could tune directly into the electromagnetic residue left behind by historical events. The underlying scientific theory behind the chronovisor was as fascinating as it was elegant. Ernetti explained that every word spoken, every gesture made, and every action taken by an individual emits a unique wave of luminous and acoustic energy. According to the basic laws of physics, energy can never be truly destroyed. It merely transforms and disperses into the cosmos. The chronovisor was engineered to capture these faint, ancient, and floating electromagnetic echoes, reassembling them into crisp, real-time visual images and perfectly synchronized audio tracks. Using a complex system of cathode ray tubes, dials, and unique metal antennae, the secret team claimed they could pinpoint any exact set of coordinates and any specific calendar date in human history. Ernetti claimed that through the glowing screen of the device, he personally witnessed the fiery destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, observed the grand, sweeping speeches of Marcus Tullius Cicero in the ancient Roman Senate, and watched the profound tragedy of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in vivid, heartbreaking detail. The machine was capable of stripping away centuries of historical bias, revealing the raw, unedited truth of our collective past. It was a technological breakthrough that should have revolutionized human understanding, proving that the past remains permanently etched into the very fabric of our universe. But the implications of a functional chronovisor were deeply terrifying to those in high positions of authority. If a machine could look back into any moment in time, the concept of privacy would instantly cease to exist. Every political conspiracy, every hidden crime, and every religious secret throughout human history would be laid completely bare to the public eye. Recognizing the absolute chaos this technology would unleash upon global stability, the Italian government and high-ranking officials within the Vatican allegedly stepped in, rapidly dismantling the machine and locking its blueprints away in a secure, classified archive. Father Ernetti spent the remainder of his life under a strict vow of absolute silence, leaving the world to wonder if the ultimate window into time is still sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to flip the switch once again. When you step back and look at these 10 cases together, It becomes impossible to ignore the cracks in our rigid version of history. From spark plugs older than humanity to modern wristwatches sealed inside ancient tombs, these physical anomalies suggest that time isn't a straight, predictable highway. Instead, it seems to behave much more like an ocean, constantly churning, folding in on itself, and throwing unexpected wreckage onto the shores of the wrong centuries. We like to think we have the universe completely figured out, but these stories prove that the boundary between our past, our present, and our future is incredibly thin, fragile, and prone to breaking when we least expect it. The next time you walk down a quiet street, feel a sudden drop in the air pressure, or see a strange storm rolling in, keep your eyes open. You might just be the next person to step off the timeline entirely. If you want to keep exploring the deep mysteries that defy explanation, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next dive into the unknown.